This is just a sample of the audiobook. To get the complete audiobook, access the link posted in the first comment.
Tiny, he presented himself to the world as the most acceptable form of a young gay man, almost a boy. The men who discovered his bloody, tortured body thought he was around 13 years old. His father described him as an optimistic and accepting young man who had a special gift of relating to almost everyone. He was the type of person who was very approachable and always looked to new challenges. Matthew had a great passion for equality and always stood up for the acceptance of people's differences. A champion of toleration and openness, had been brutally beaten to death for being gay. The lesson could not be clearer, nor the tragedy deeper. To add a touch of perfection to the picture, his murderers were also out of a Hollywood movie script, redneck losers from a rural state obviously brimming with anti-gay hatred. I remember vividly my own response to the news, an involuntary spasm of disgust, nausea, and terror. It was, after all, a classic gay nightmare, the kind of thing that kept me and countless others in the closet for years, a possible hookup with a stranger that could go terribly wrong. Just the bare facts of the story as we heard them. Gay kid murdered by a rural bigot, left to die. Cemented in our minds and psyches everything we had feared as we grew into gay adulthood. We instantly believed we knew the truth, because it had haunted our souls most of our lives. And what other motive could there be for savagery like that? It reeked of unhinged, irrational, violent homophobia. It took some time before it emerged that the first mention that the murder was an anti-gay hate crime was when the girlfriend of Aaron McKinney, Kristen Price, came up with the idea in the panicked hours after the assault. Price later conceded she had made that up. But the early rumor was enough for the media to run with the story of hate until within days the outlines had been set and the stakes raised. Suddenly, a horrifying murder was a way to reveal just how deadly much of the country allegedly was for gays and lesbians, and to evoke sympathy and horror from every segment of society. That horror could help advance the argument for gay equality in a period when it was very much in the headlines and the Congress. It was a time when marriage equality was in the news, and when don't ask, don't tell was the military's policy toward gay service members. The message was particularly useful for gay rights groups like the Human Rights Campaign, whose fundraising skyrocketed in the wake of the shocking murder. But it wasn't true. The story, as you will read in these pages, is far darker, murkier, and revealing than a classic hate crime. Rereading this book years later, it seems to me that the murder had absolutely nothing to do with homophobia. It involved rather what was then a growing scourge of crystal meth use among both the rural poor and the gay male community at the turn of the century, and the murder of a young gay man in rural Wyoming was a classic case of where the two meth populations met and overlapped. As the cops eventually conceded, this was a drug-related murder, related to a meth delivery, a desperate McKinney seeking money or another hit, and a naive kid caught up in a world he didn't fully understand. Shepard knew McKinney, his murderer, before their encounter at the bar that night, and the two had been sexually involved on and off for quite some time. More telling to me was that the savagery of the murder is far more plausibly explained by the fact that McKinney had been on a meth binge of several days and nights before he lost his mind in rage, rather than that he had instantly become a raging bigot with no record of homophobia before. Sometimes I imagine what would have happened if we'd always known the more complicated truth. The lesson would be about a drug that was cutting a swath through the middle of the country, especially in rural areas, and devastating gay men in cities in the wake of the AIDS epidemic. Vulnerable souls, seeking confidence or release or exhilaration for a while, were prey for this particular poison, and gay men, often surviving childhood trauma or laced with self-hatred or sexually compulsive, seemed particularly at risk. If we had been able to have a serious national conversation about this otherwise concealed epidemic of drug abuse, especially among gay men, then we might have been